usually a pleasure of mine being in the media and being somebody who works a lot with entrepreneurs to interview people. But it's very rare pleasure when you're actually interviewing your own business partner. And this is what's happening today. I'm interviewing Raed Masri, who's an amazing San Francisco based serial Canadian entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and institutional LP who has a track record as an engineer, product manager, entrepreneur, executive, allocator to VC funds, and most recently, the founder of Transform VC, where I have also become recently a partner. Let me tell you a little bit about Raed so that you understand the kind of background that he brings in, both as the managing partner of Transform VC, but also as an entrepreneur, and the kind of quality of thinking, the quality of decision making, the quality of hand holding that he is able to do due to this unique background that he has. So Raed, sorry, who grew up in Saudi Arabia, was also, once he went to Canada, got his engineering degree, partially responsible for introducing new wireless policy into Canada when he founded Jaguar Wireless, a qualified bidder in Canada's national wireless auction in 2008, with a bid of 213 million dollars. Later, Raed was also responsible for bringing in-flight internet across Canada when he founded SkySurf, the executive carrier to in-flight communication, which he sold then to GoGo in flight. So if anybody was in 2008 to 2017 flying over Canada, he was using Raed's wireless technology. In America, once Raed exited, he became a VC and institutional LP and a key founding member of Mubadala Ventures in San Francisco, where he actually started it from his own living room. At Transform VC, which is where we align and our missions align, he decided that he will take all of his learning and figure out how to help other founders like him basically overcome all the challenges that he had. He has a conviction that founders may be dismissed due to certain elements, sometimes ethnicity, sometimes gender, sometimes just not having the right network. And because of his deep roots in Silicon Valley, Canada, and the Middle East, through Transform BC, he's able to identify and build conviction in these kind of opportunities and these kind of founders from early on. He's a lifelong learner, but I have seen firsthand how he is able to use the knowledge that he has and pivot easily when he is confronted with new information. One of the things that I've also learned about Raed, and he has a lovely young daughter who lives in Dubai, that he uses the products that he actually advocates for and he invests in, and he is one of the best examples of tonal users, one of the companies that he has founded. A lot of you, if you've lived in the States in the past few years, you've realized that Tonal, the company that he has helped launch, is the premier type of equipment, physical equipment type of setup that is taking the world by storm. As you can tell from the way that I'm describing it, I am not personally into exercise. So with that kind of background, with that kind of information about Raed and his knowledge and his expertise, I'd like to start this very unique interview opportunity. Raed, أهلا وسهلا بيك معايا.
اهلا وانا تشرفنا.
ما عليك، قعدت تتكلم كتير بس I wanted people to understand your background, and maybe one of the things that people would love to learn a little bit about you is, how did you actually start as a founder? You started in Canada rather than the Middle East, which is where your network would be. How did you start? Why did you leave engineering and get into enterprises?
So as for most Middle Eastern youngsters, we're confronted with two options upon graduating from high school. You either go into medicine or you go into engineering. So I very quickly realized I did not want to be a doctor. So the only other choice was being an engineer. So ended up applying to a few schools, got accepted at a number of them, but eventually went to Carleton University in Ottawa. Why? Because they offered me a scholarship that I didn't even apply for. So my dad is like, "Okay, you're going there." So that's how my future was set. And turned out Ottawa, where Carleton University was based, was once called Silicon Valley North. Picked up that name because it had massive technology companies like Nortel and Corel and Mitel, all these multi-10 or $100 billion companies, none of which exist today. So I learned the hard lesson that all these Silicon Valleys around the world, when the market corrects, they contract or even disappear. But the real Silicon Valley, where I am today, finally, remains standing. So despite all that, I did a few interesting things, all out of Silicon Valley North. And the truth be told is it all started out of a school project. My fourth year engineering project was called the Nortel Case Competition, where two engineers and two business students came together to form a team. We competed against other student teams and went through a 4-month program where all these billionaires came and inspired us every week. And at the end of that, we had what it was called the presentation day. Of course, Canadians aren't as good at marketing as Americans, so we, instead of calling it demo day, we called it presentation day. I did that in September of 1999. And 6 years before YC was invented. I say that because YC later on became the premier accelerator for startups. I did that 6 years prior, before it was even born. And we were the dark horse of the competition, a fancy word I invented to mean everyone thought we would win, but we did not win. The following year, I was lucky to become the mentor of the Black Sheep team, the team that no one expected anything of, and they ended up winning. So that was my segue into entrepreneurship, and it was a brilliant start because going through engineering, all I could think of is my dad and having been an engineer and having to live away from the family to make a living. And I always thought engineering was really a bad choice because I don't want to be like that. But I discovered that it was only a tool, that I actually have, I can make my own future. And I decided that entrepreneurship is the way to go.
Like early on, you realized that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, but you had the skills of an engineer. So
yeah.
Given that you got that taste early on in college, and a lot of people now, I mean, this is becoming quite normal these days rather than abnormal, as in, in 1999, which is probably most people would not go into a demo day or a presentation day. What made you actually create the actual company? Like, how did that happen?
Well, I actually, like a lot of my peers, I ended up getting a job. I had 2 job offers. I ended up getting one. So I did the 9 to 5 for about 7 months. But every day I just projected my life forward, and I could see myself living my dad's life. And I didn't want that life. I didn't want to be bound to a place. I wanted my freedom. So I let go of the 9 to 5 and instead went to the 9 to midnight. And I've been in pursuit of freedom for the last 22 years.
Okay, and so you were able to found not one but 2 companies that successfully exited at 2x return. Amazing. And you went from being an entrepreneur, a successful one, and I'm sure there were, as you always say, you've had a few miserable failures. So it wasn't just a high road trajectory, but there were issues. How did you leave entrepreneurship to get into VC? What is the reason that you went into that instead of becoming just a serial entrepreneur?
Sure. Well, I was a serial entrepreneur. I had 5 startups, 3 miserable failures, and I got lucky twice with 20x outcomes, actually. But I discovered 2 lessons being an entrepreneur in Canada. As much as I love Canada, it is home. A lot of what I am is a product of that ecosystem. However, the 2 lessons learned is, one, Canada, as much as I love it, it's the wrong place. If I want to have global impact with technology, I need to be in Silicon Valley. I need to be in America. 99.99% of any technology that touches the lives of billions of people is invented in America. So I want it to be impactful and influential where technology is invented, not where it is consumed. So that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, the maximum one can hope to accomplish as an entrepreneur is make myself a billionaire. I cannot have a bigger dream than that. However, As a venture capitalist, I have the legitimate aspiration to help create 1,000 others who hold my values dear. What are my values? I love Canada. I love America. I love our way of life, our values, and so on. But I have deep compassion, appreciation for our pains, our ambitions, our struggles back home. So we, as you know, we set out on a goal at Transform VC to accomplish exactly that.
So before we get into Transform VC, I just wanted to understand a little bit more about the VC, because you went into Mubadala first and you worked with Mubadala in Silicon Valley. What did you learn at that level of, like, I'm sure a lot of young people who are here with us, who are entrepreneurs, are also going into the VC domain or sector. What are the things that they should watch out for? What are the things that they should think about if they want to enter the venture capitalist, whether it is as an angel investor or as a pre-seed, Series A, Series B, you know? Um,
I think the advice I have here is quite generic, but it's quite substantive, I would say, because for any walk of life, for anything you ever want to do, you really need two ingredients: determination and ambition. Every single startup that I was involved in, every single one of them, including Mubadala Ventures, including Transform VC, on day one, I had no idea what I was doing, but I applied myself and I learned and I was humble. You got to continue to be humble and learning and learn from others and seek knowledge. Just be hungry. When you have that, then you don't work a single day in your life. You love what you do so much. Um, so some of
but
the
this,
lessons.
I think these are like major themes that kind of like permeate your life, right? And they're amazing. But can you give us like a little bit more of a concrete example, both as an Arab founder and like something you've, or as a founder, so not even as an Arab, just as a founder, and also as a VC, from your experience. You talked about the failures, right? So when do you know when to give up on something, and when do you persist, because you've had three things that didn't work out and two things that did? What was the difference, and when did you know to walk away versus to actually, stick to your guns?
I'm gonna regurgitate a lesson I learned from one of our founders. He says, "Listen, you need to have a thick skin, but not a thick mind."
Mm.
Said by Ali Oradi, the founder and CEO of Tonal. I love that quotation. Now, that being said, in sharing some of my stories, I think as an entrepreneur, there are a few lessons I learned. And all on my own dime. Up to this point, 23 years as an adult, I have never raised a single dime from any VC. Believe it or not, I'm a VC myself, but I have never raised any money from any VC in my entire
Very
life.
interesting, and that's the exception. Usually, people are looking for a VC. Let me see. Somebody asked, "What is a VC?" VC is a venture capital fund, which means that's and she's somebody. Rana Al Jamal is asking about how do you define VC, and basically it is al mal al jari. So it is money that you put into startups at a time when you're not sure whether they will succeed or not. You do your best analysis, but then you're investing it, and usually it's, I think the amount of money varies a little bit from being an angel investor, which is I think $50,000 and less, and VC becoming more than that. So I'm just answering a question that was on the that I saw in the chat. Um, but please continue, Raed, with
Yeah,
the list.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think this goes to the point. There are underrepresented, underserved entrepreneurs. I didn't realize this. Maybe I never received VC funding because I was Arab. I don't know. I didn't care, to be honest. I was determined. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I found a way. When there's a will, there's a way. Most of my startups were funded initially with my own capital. From that 7 month job that I had, I think I had saved $20,000. That was my startup capital. Of course, 26 months later, I ran out of money, so I go to dad and say, "Dad, please give me some money." But he, in a very Middle Eastern fashion, he goes, "Go get back your job. I'm not giving you any money." So I said, "Listen, if you don't believe in me, I believe in me." So I ended up working for Uber 8 years before Uber was even invented. In the year 2001, I drove my Honda Civic Si every single night from 10 p.m. to 4 or 5 a.m., driving party goers, hookers, drug dealers, and and party goers. Where this dispatcher tells me where to go, and I drop people off. He gets 20%, I keep 80%. So I used to make $500 a night, and that's how I funded my startup. Eventually, I built my product and I started funding it through customer sales.
Oh,
And
okay.
and that was the brilliant part, is when you're making revenue, then that's not non-dilutive capital that you can use to grow the business.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I learned, of course, a lot of lessons there, that such as customer acquisition. Doesn't matter how good your product is, if you can't distribute it effectively, if it costs you more to distribute it than revenue generated, then that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think that's an issue with a lot of startups where the sales part comes in quite late. They're so fixated on perfecting the product that they don't figure out how to get a co-founder who's very good in marketing and sales, or to actually spend a little bit more money than they would want to on acquiring customers, because without customers you don't have revenue. Although there are some, like, you do hear about those type of I won't say unicorns, but I mean like exceptional companies where they do a lot of, and one of them is Ample, which is one of your companies, where they put a lot of money on research and development upfront for them to be able to get a product that probably will work. Um, so there are people like you, right?
There are. I'm definitely not unique. I think what's unique here is we're just, as a community, we've been generally overlooked and dismissed. We've been generally disorganized. We're
And it's
saying,
different about Transform VC. This is what you're about, right?
yeah, this is one of the things we're about, is we pay special affinity for Middle Easterns in America, or Middle Easterns that are not in America, whom we can help bring to Silicon Valley so they can crack the code open in weeks instead of years on their own. So that's part of our thesis. We think we're not saying that Middle Easterns are smarter than everyone else. No, we're just saying we're starting at our lower base. So just for us to catch up with everyone else, that's an economic opportunity. But we also, of course, invest in other underrepresented and minority founders. That is true as of always. But we're willing to spend the extra half hour, take that extra meeting, if the founder, he or she, is a Middle Eastern or has a Middle Eastern connection. But we do believe in Silicon Valley. We don't believe in tech tourism. We want people to come and live the experience, and when where technology is invented. Again, not where it is consumed in the rest of the world.
So the thesis that you have is that how can you, one, identify brilliant ideas um, from people who are often dismissed, and then fund them, bring them to Silicon Valley, help them crack the code of Silicon Valley so that they're able to get the network, the right resources, the right tools, the right other VCs coming in, and basically for them to be able to do what? What is the difference between somebody being successful in Silicon Valley versus being successful in Saudi Arabia or UAE or Jordan?
Listen, I always like to use sport analogies, and I always refer to Champions League. I think Mohamed Salah, we all love him, fantastic player, but I believe he arrived 30 years too late. Had there been someone like a Transform VC 30 years ago, then we'd see Majid Abdullah or Mahmoud Khatib or Jassim Yaqub or Adnan Tilyani or many others lifting that Champions League trophy. And instead of the Arab world wanting or celebrating making the World Cup, we'd be thinking about how to win the World Cup, something that is today not even part of the realm of our dreams, unfortunately. And I always say, if the Middle East wants to win the World Cup, first, we must win Champions League in a sustainable, systematic fashion. A one-off is not enough. As we all know, one Mohamed Salah is not enough to even make the World Cup, let alone win it.
So, can I ask you a question? Do you think a lot of good ideas are being dismissed because of ethnicity, really? Or is it because VCs are just too busy? They get so many emails that if there is not kind of a connection to the VC people, you don't really get to hear. You don't get your idea to be heard.
It's a combination of the two. When you're really busy, your tolerance for new ideas or new people or people who don't look like you becomes less and less. So the affinity does play a role.
Okay.
Now, you might catch a VC at the right time when he or she is relaxed and willing to listen, and that occasionally happens. I'm not saying there are no Middle Eastern gets funding in Silicon Valley. That's not true. Some Middle Easterns get funding in Silicon Valley, but I'm saying the number of Middle Easterns who receive funding and make it is a lot less relative to other communities because of the lack of affinity.
Okay, so you said something that's also very interesting. You're like, I like to identify the best. How do you identify the best? Who is the best?
So to each, each venture capitalist or each investor has their own criteria. We have criteria surrounding the business opportunity, and we have criteria surrounding the founding team itself. So regarding the opportunity, we believe that as soon as anyone innovates, creates some sort of technological innovation, and then demonstrates commercial success, then there will be 100 copycats.
Mm.
So how do you win most of the market or all of the market? Well, we need compounding defensibility. Something that makes you stronger over time. We call that the network effects. That's in fact the most important concept since the internet was invented. So that's one thing. You need to have that 10x advantage. Your product needs to be 10 times better than anything else. Otherwise, people will not leave what they have to come to you. And of course, we like to see some sort of technology moat or deep technology, because otherwise it'll be very easy to replicate. So those are the three things we look for in a company. When it comes to founders, we look for founders that are, extraordinary salespeople. And maybe that's a bias I have, having had to do a lot of sales early on in my life. But I discovered that as a founder, you're constantly selling. You're selling to new employees to get them to quit their jobs and join you on your crazy journey. You're selling to investors to give you capital. You're selling customers to, trust in you, and so on. We're constantly selling. But we also look for founders that are frugal and resourceful, someone that can get through or around walls. And I coined a term. I say wastefulness scales really well. So if you're very wasteful with $100, guess what? When I give you $1 million, you're going to waste it even quicker. So we look for founders that are able to stretch every dollar to the max, are able to get a lot done and very little, that are able to say something and actually live by it, um, and be authentic and tell their truth.
What are the red flags other than wastefulness if you get a founder coming in either with his idea or with his team?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. First of all, we don't invest in a first meeting. We
Mm.
like that. We call that, and this is not unique of Transform. Other VCs do this as well. VCs don't like to invest in dots. We like to invest in lines. What does that mean? So when we have a first meeting, that's a dot. Then we follow up with you, say a month later, that's another dot. Then hey, we can draw a line between those two dots. When we have a third meeting, then we can extend the line. So we want to invest in lines. We've seen you progress over time, seen you execute on things you say you'll execute on. So that's kind of in a general sense. In terms of founder dynamics, uh, we look for founders that complete one another. They say for every startup, you need three type of personas. You need a hacker, a hustler, and a designer.
Mm.
A hacker, someone who's coding; a hustler, someone who's selling; and someone who is a designer who's making it all packaged really well so that you can present it to customers. Sometimes all three are in one person. Sometimes it's across multiple people.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the things, because I did a lot of angel investing before I joined Transform VC. One of the things I think matters to me is the cohesion of the group. So I like to have about 6 meetings. Most people like to have 3 meetings with a new entity, and I like to have 6 meetings, and I usually like to also visit them if possible, because the first meeting, founders are able to present like this. They've memorized that pitch deck, and they know exactly what roles they're playing. The second time you meet them, they are a little bit more relaxed with you, and as they should be, and they're giving you a little bit more. By the third meeting, you actually understand which founders are not there, are not really contributing, if there is a lot of tension between founders. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. What I'm saying is that, are they able to resolve these things, whether it is with your guidance or with their own stuff or not? Because that tells you, once you do invest with them, all these problems will be exasperated. They don't get resolved. Very few things that are fundamental to the group dynamic gets resolved with a little bit more money. Actually, there's more resentment, because then somebody who has, so a lot of times, like, founders would have equal equity, and the one who's doing a lot of the work, like 7 8 months in, gets very upset because he's being treated exactly the same way as everybody else, while some of them are not even answering emails. And so these are the things that I look for, the cohesion. And I remember one of the times that we met with a lovely, lovely group of entrepreneurs working on an app, and I won't say more than that. Um, because I don't want them to be identified, is that the way that you were questioning them about their technical skills, uh, I thought your engineering and entrepreneurship in technology gave you an edge that other VCs that I've met don't have, because they think of it as a business a decision mostly. And a lot of times you're looking at the engineering issues behind it. And I thought that was very unique. I mean, it's not the most unique, but it is a unique experience that you bring in that a lot of other VCs don't have. They need to bring in experts at a later stage, which is costly, because every time you're delaying understanding whether this technology is the kind of technology that would work, that would be that has the 10x effect, as you said, and the network effect.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
that matters. So I've enjoyed actually listening to you and learning from you about these things, because these are things that are not actually on my agenda. I know
That's
that we have a lot of engineers and a lot of MIT people attending, and I think some of them might have some questions for you. So I would love to be able to interact and see the chat. If you guys are, if you can put your questions at the chat, or can I actually allow people to talk? I'm not sure. If somebody has a raised hand. So we answered those questions that Rana had posted. I think only Rana posted. So let me see. Current room. Ah, okay. There is current room. Let's see. What are the local structural challenges that hinder startups in increasing MENA presence on the global markets, and what can be done to address them?
okay. That's a great question. I think the Arab world as a collective is, I don't know, 370 million people. That's a larger economic bloc than America. So at surface, we should be ahead. But some of the blocks is the borders. Quite frankly, it's really 23 regulators, 23 borders, 23 everything, or 22. I forget the number that founders have to contend with. And as a result, it creates a massive hurdle. Now, how do we fix that? I think obviously this is above my pay grade, but my humble opinion is we need to have some sort of economic bloc, economic free zone across the 22 countries, so that we become a single bloc. And what does that entail? Maybe the same currency and so on. That's been tried and unsuccessfully. So, like I said, these are some of my ideas from my perspective. However, we've made the determination that we better serve our community by helping them crack Silicon Valley in weeks instead of years. That's where we decided to pay attention. We think we are quite unique. No one else is doing this. And the second order and third order consequence of that is our Middle Eastern founders are going to go back home and be impactful in the Middle East, just like they will be impactful globally.
So I'm going to also answer a little bit that question, and then I think I'll be very mindful of everybody's time, because we are a little bit running over late, but we started a little bit later as well. So I think from my experience, even when countries say there's ease of business, that once you hit the reality, a lot of times there's regulations. So in different countries in the Arab world, and I'm not mentioning Saudi Arabia or even Gulf countries alone, but I mean, I'm talking all the way from Morocco all the way to Iraq. You want to do something and you need to have approvals, and to be able to understand which committee, which ministry, which place to get an approval of is not always easy. And then sometimes you get an approval for part of it from one ministry, but you need to get another approval for another part that you're not told about except later. So there's that kind of dissonance between regulations and just the ability to bulldozer through and create your app or create your business and expand quickly. So a lot of legal things that you have to keep in mind. Local knowledge, like really understanding who has the decision making on certain things. Continuous access to capital. In the US, it's just a lot more easier once an idea has proven at a certain stage to be viable, to keep on getting capital later on, versus in other places where you would get a lot of pre-seed or Series A, and then in latter stages in some Arab countries, it's very difficult to be able to grow from small to medium, and that's when a lot of ideas die. And I think also one last thing is the ease of leaving business. So let's say your business, you decide to actually close it because it's not working. It's not so easy to leave, especially if you have partners from other parts of the world. Leaving a place or closing the business becomes more difficult. And so, if you, especially if you're opened up in another country, whereas in the U.S. it's 370, it's almost all the states have very similar regulations. A little bit of work with the Chamber of Commerce of the state or the city that you're in helps you quite a lot. Just it's a lot easier to open, sustain, and close in the U.S. Even
Back
better.
up a lot.
Thank you all for being here, for allowing me to interview my business partner. It's been a pleasure, ya Raed. I think this is my first time I've ever interviewed somebody that I've worked with. So very happy to have done it. And thank you. I know it's very early in Silicon Valley for joining us.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, MIT, and a real pleasure to be here.
الله يعطيكم العافية جميعا. تسلموا ونشوف وشكم بخير.